going to start by asking Julius to explain to us these things that we are seeing from a war in Ukraine and currently in Israel, the high inflation rates globally, high interest rates, high debt levels, the competition for new global world order. How are they interconnected, and what is causing what, and what can we expect to see? Is it going to settle?
Yes, it's going to settle. I mean, you just need to have some knowledge on general systems theory. That the world goes, any system goes through some instability, will go through a steady state at some point. If you were in the middle of Second World War, you would have thought probably the world will end, or the Spanish flu. So these things have some instability. Where we are today is a product of the end of the Cold War, where there was some tension and the world had a steady state. Then America then became a unipolar power. Now when it became a unipolar power, America also deteriorated in its own way. So you see the emergence of Obama, then the whites reacted, and so elected Trump. So when you have a nation in power, the country then causes some instability in the world. So it's a product of some upheaval. And so we are going through, this magnified upheaval, but it will go to a steady state. Now the question is, how long will that take? And who will provide that leadership for that stability? So, I mean, if you look at just change theory generally, change theory says that if there is some instability in a system, okay, sometimes it requires some shock to then stabilize it. Now, what we don't know is what that shock will be that will stabilize the world eventually. I mean, look at even Second World War. The shock was the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that brought down the war ended. Because then Japan was shocked. Okay? So there will be some shock. Okay? It could be what Vincent was talking about, that some nuclear thing could be unleashed by Israel or the Iranians or somebody else. Okay? And so to me, I see one shock which is coming. I don't know what it is, but I see a shock coming within the next 1 or 2 years that will then shock people into sanity. It will shock America not to bring more to power. And it could also lead to the emergence of a world power, a new world power. I see, for example, India, okay, might. It depends on how Modi plays his game. It could be India. I don't think it will be China. Russia is too weak, economic-wise, to influence the world. So it could be India or some. Europe is too weak now to then provide that military might. What America is going through is, you see, when a country like America, if you look at their debt position, their global debt position is 32 trillion against a GDP of 25. So America is in a very weak position. The only thing that gives them that power is military might. So in overall, when you look at all these forces together, the system is being jolted by too many waves, but there will be one single wave that will come that will calm things down. I don't know what it is. We probably can debate here, but something will stabilize and people will sober up and say, okay, now let's do the right things. But meanwhile, your business has to survive. So that then you reach that that point. So we will discuss that as we go along. But Ombogo, that is my view from just systems theory.
Let me just ask you just a follow-up question. So, how is this crisis, that is really being driven by big countries, how is it being, transmitted back to people like us? How does it end up becoming high interest rates, high inflation?
Okay, if you look at America, America is the trigger for a lot of these economic challenges. For example, because of the 2008 and then COVID, America printed a lot of money to make the economy sustainable. So because they printed money, of course, inflation went up. So when inflation goes up, interest rates go up in America. Now, when interest rates go up, okay, a lot of the money that Americans invest abroad comes back to America. So that is the reason why our shilling is deteriorating, because of inflation in America, because they printed money, and then when they mop it up, they have to increase interest rates, and so therefore dollars go back to America. So that's the real trigger. Now, yesterday, their central bank, the Federal Reserve Board, halted the increase in rates. Now, we hope that will stabilize for a while, and that will hopefully make funds now return some of those dollars back to countries like ours. And we probably might see the shilling begin to stabilize, but there's a time lag before it begins to stabilize. So it just requires one of us, because as you said earlier on, we are too interconnected. It requires one of us to misbehave, and it destabilizes the whole world. China is going to be in trouble because, you see, if you look at a country like China, its stability was predicated on high economic growth rate so that then they could silence people. Now, they are growing around 5 to 6%, and so the average Chinese is beginning to get upset. So it might actually topple the Communist Party. So it's going to knock off, even people like Putin are going to be under a lot of pressure, because if your economic base is predicated on I'm giving you money, so shut up. So that's why countries like India have a very good prospect, because it's a chaotic democracy, but people can speak. So you have to look at the major players, how they are rearranging themselves in a global setup, and try to predict how each of them begins to influence the world. But the larger economies like the US, still, when they sneeze, the world catches a flu.
Thank you very much, Julius. I hope the audience are beginning to connect a couple of dots. I want to jump you, Brenda, but I go to Abdi and ask Abdi, coming back home, how bad are things in Kenya? What are businesses dealing with?
Thank you very much. The framing of that question, how bad are things, can only take you in one direction. So what I will do is I will rebel against the question. Many years ago I went through media training, and one of the things I remember is the one that says the interviewer owns the question and you own the answer. So sometimes you reframe the question. You go to something that says, the real question that needs to be answered is, and then you ask your own question and then you answer. So I think the real question is, how are things in Kenya? Not how bad is it, but how are things in Kenya? Because that then allows me to talk about what is going well, and there's a few, and what is not going well. I think that when you run an organization like ABSA, which I do, and I think many of the people here are probably in similar large organizations that have been there for a while. And in the case of ABSA, we opened our first branch in Mombasa in 1916. So we've lived through the First World War, the Great Depression of the 1930s, Second World War, the Mau Mau, Kenya's independence, early regime, post-independence, the 1990s, high interest, high inflation, and some of us, I think, were in the industry by then. More recently, the global financial crisis, COVID, Ukraine, Palestine, Israel, and it goes on, isn't it? When you've been in that kind of an organization that has been there for that long, you have both a long-term view, where you look at the country with a very long lens, where we came from, where we are today, and then you have the everyday, weekly, daily, monthly, because as Julius was saying, there is the survival element of what do I need to be doing today. When you put that long-term lens on Kenya, actually we've done very well. If you look at the infrastructural development in this country over this period, we're not talking 5 years, we're not talking one term of a government, we're talking that long lens. A lot of progress has been made. You know, I came to Kenyatta University in '89, and I remember, you know, we used to take the bus from KU to come into town when we have the boom in the pocket. And there used to be Kina Florida 2000 and a lot of amazing places in Nairobi. But the memory I have of the road, you know, it was dark, it was narrow, thicker road. And today when you drive on that road, the way it looks like, you know, I started flying out of Jomo Kenyatta when it was still, many years ago, when it was still a very basic airport. You could almost wave somebody from outside as they are departing. There was a waving place over the fence where you could see the departing people. And today, it's a major, major hub for the region. And many, many other examples, the political development, the freedoms. You know, if you take any copy of the Daily Nation from the days when I was in the university, it's very boring reading. It used to be which development project was opened today. And today it's a very robust media, social media, keeping everybody on toes. So long-term, great developments, a lot of amazing things happening. When you look at the future, you know, I sit in meetings today, even in Kenya, where you get this positive vibe, energy. Around the Africa Climate Summit, I was attending some meetings where in a single room there is X billion dollars of investment, green energy, looking for opportunity within Kenya. And you leave that room feeling very positive, very energetic about the country, where it's going. You look at fintech. You know, last year alone, Kenya attracted $200 million of fintech investment. It's almost 15% of everything that came into the continent of Africa came to Kenya. Kenya is a hotspot for fintech, and you know, Strathmore does a good job of being part of that ecosystem. So amazing things happening. And then you come to, James, back to your question, the issue of, you know, interest rates, inflation, the FX markets where we are in unprecedented territory, most of it caused by what the US Fed has been doing, printing money during COVID to pay people in their homes when they are not working. Checks were being delivered through the mail. And everybody knew they are planting the seeds for inflation. And when they fight that inflation, unfortunately, because the dollar is a global currency, it has impact across the board. And then a lot of other local reasons, including fuel price and many other things coming to make it very difficult. The issue of sovereign debt, you know, across the continent. You've seen some people worse than us, Ghana, Mozambique, Zambia, Kenya itself experiencing that process as we speak. And therefore dealing with all of those as a business. And the question for us as leaders is, so what? What do we need to do? And the way I look at it is we need to avoid extremes. One extreme is the one that you bury your head in the sand or in the clouds. Everything is going well. Let's go for the opportunities. Where are the new things, etc., without doing a systematic analysis of the risks and the issues that the business faces. That's an extreme you want to avoid. The other extreme is the easy one, and banks are famous for this. Oh, there is risk here, bang, shut down. We are not doing anything in that space. You don't want to do that as well. So you want to invest in systems, technologies, data, people that will help your business identify and proactively deal with what you can call, the key systemic risks, the things that could really take you out of business. There is a famous example in the Gulf of Mexico when we had the worst oil spill in history a few years ago that almost took BP out of business. And when they were reviewing what happened, the company had pages this size of risk analysis on very small things, ensuring staff are safe. When you walk down the stairs, do you hold the railing? How far do you place your hot cup of tea from the edge of the table, etc. But in those tons of documents, there was not a single mention of the piece of equipment that blew up and caused the worst oil spill in the world. And I think as leaders, what we need to say is, what are the large systemic risks that could take us out? And how do we ensure as a business that we are ready for it? So that's one component you need to invest in. And the second component is just the opposite. How do you do the same for opportunities? Because believe me, today in this same country, there are businesses that are having a great future that are doing amazing things. I saw a tea exporter who is doing value added. They have an organic type of theme, good labor practices. They're adding value. They're branding it Kenyan tea. It's selling in retailers in the UK and in the US. It's still a very small business, but their margin is this big, and they're doing very good business. How do we help such people scale and develop? Because that then changes the dynamic for the continent. Instead of exporting huge quantities of raw tea at very low cost. So there are real opportunities, and as businesses we should be saying, how do we identify those opportunities and the risks and play within that space? So that's how I will answer your question, James.
I totally accept your changing of the question, but you have still answered my question. Thank you very much. In fact, as I was listening to you and recalling what Julia said, I find convergence in so far the conversation we had. Number one, I see that Julia says, though we think that we are in such deep crisis, he says it will come to an end. And then Abdi says, since it will come to an end, as a businessman, take a long-term view. Right? I think that's the biggest lesson from these two answers. Abdi has added something in saying, in the midst of crisis, there are also opportunities. And it's very interesting because that is the same question I had for Brenda, because you see, this traffic that I talked about, and she probably will tell us a little bit about it, they just started it in the midst of what we are saying is a difficult time. So, I mean, I'm just wondering, I was asking her whether is it being crazy to start thinking of starting a business, or is it that in the situation when there is a storm, there's always a silver lining in that cloud. So tell us a little bit about the thinking of starting this in the current environment.
Thank you, James, and good evening. I won't be like my fellow panelist, Abdi. I'll take the question. Abdi has assumed you know what Florida 2000 is. You may need to expound. That's why they may not know. We know. But thank you so much. So how do we see opportunity in the crisis? So let me just explain about TRIFIC. And isn't that a great way of calling us? Because we are Two Rivers International Finance and Innovation Center. Put that together and you get TRIFIC. So you could say terrific, TRIFIC, or just TRIFIC. TRIFIC got its Special Economic Zone license from the Kenya government and the Special Economic Zone Authority in June this year. And we started to action on the plan in July. But it was a journey to get the licensing. It didn't just all happen immediately, etc. So there was the vision. TRIFIC is part of the Centum Group, who also have a long history, not as long as Absa Bank. I was doing my calculation with my pen. 107 years, so congratulations. So we're really a new kid on the block. And what are we? We're the only private sector special economic zone focused on business services, so not on manufacturing. And we're within the Two Rivers ecosystem, which means we're within the UN diplomatic zone. And any of you who know about Two Rivers, it's very self-sustaining. It has its own power plant, its own water plant, its own data center. So everything within the ecosystem is provided for. And indeed, the security is first class, run by one of the Centum companies called Tribus, who also do cybersecurity training for the UN and the diplomatic corps and for some of government of Kenya. So in terms of facilities, everything is there. And that's what you need. You need first-class infrastructure facilities to be able to attract the sort of businesses that we're looking for to put into this ecosystem. And when you talk about special economic zones, what are you talking about? You're talking about the government giving strategic incentives, various ones of them, for business that operate within a specific ecosystem. So you have to be domiciled within a special economic zone. And hopefully those incentives will make it worth your while to come and be domiciled there. And if you think, for some of you, you may know your companies may have some sort of entity in Mauritius or in Dubai Financial Center or in Morocco or in the UK, those incentives are now being offered and better here in Kenya. So people would say, really? And I'd say, yes, because we are all very skeptical and we need to be more positive and know that the government is going out of their way to encourage this, to encourage more foreign direct investment. So I hear you talk about the silver lining. So there are clouds, okay? Clouds are, yes, we've touched on it, the global financial crisis. So you have very volatile financial markets. And we're seeing that with our exchange rates. The historical context. So we have historical context. We go back and we talk about the Great Depression. We talk about the Spanish flu. But more recently, COVID. But that also points to an answer in terms of our resilience. Yes, we suffered. Yes, unfortunately, we lost a lot of lives. But yes, we are here today. However, now you're looking at regional conflicts, and you've touched on it. The war in Ukraine was bad enough. We watched it, and I think some of us, we kept saying, that is Ukraine, Europe, we understand. What we're now seeing in Gaza and between Hamas and Israel, I think somehow it's a bit closer home. And when you see the devastation as well, and it's constant in the last few weeks, you really say, what is happening to us? So I do agree with you, Julius. I don't know. And when you say something more is going to happen before we get it right, that is more worrying. But Anthony also said, let's have some long-term thinking. So let's have this long-term thinking. But the long-term thinking could also be, so where do we play? And one thing that will be a thread of a lot of what I'll discuss tonight is the phenomenal, skilled, talented workforce that we have, we could say in Africa, but we have here in Kenya. And for ourselves at TRIFIC as a special economic zone, one of the things that will be attracting investment into Kenya is this talented workforce. Let's not underestimate it. Let's not underestimate how many Kenyans are actually in what you could call a gig economy, working for a more global footprint. And when you're in a special economic zone, you can look at the likes of India, which Julie's alluded to, could be the next global force, and the likes of the Philippines, who through special economic zones have created not thousands, millions of jobs through what we call business process outsourcing, which is an untapped source here in Africa, but especially in Kenya. Because guess what? And let's look at Strathmore. Kenyans are known for having very good English language skills. And we get that through an education system that we hope the government continues to invest in. We are also known for having a great disposition. Now, some of us may discuss that further, but when you look at those who we may call our competitors in Africa, we're actually very mild-mannered, very pleasant, and very welcoming. And we could just take that for granted. So it's where are we going to play as we go forward? And so I talked to you about those challenges, which were the global financial crisis, the historical context, the contemporary challenges, which are the pandemic, the conflicts that are currently ongoing. But then the silver linings are the fact that we're very innovative. Abdi alluded to it in terms of how much investment we've attracted from fintech. We're also extremely adaptable. And one of our strengths, even for ourselves at TRIFIC, is we are lean. We are not mean, but we are lean. We adapt. And I have to also comment at Dr. Guto, who said, you know what, it's about learning on the job. Yes, I'm not coming as a special economic zone guru, but I have definitely learned on the job. And we're adaptable, we listen, we're keen, we're informed, we know when to pivot, because we do need to pivot. When you fail, fail fast and move on. And also, as a country, knowing where you can diversify, knowing your strengths, and I think that's something we're very good at. So as TRIFIC, we are very optimistic. We are also extremely ambitious, and we look forward to so many of you coming with us on this journey. Thank you, Dr. Mambuka.
Thank you very much, Brenda. You've talked, you know, I've got a very good panel because they've, in the process of addressing one question I've given, they're giving you snippets of, you know, the next question that I was going to ask them, which is, for example, in this fast-changing, shifting sands, how does the business survive? Because for sure we have to agree, there are times when things are stable, and then there's a time like we are in when we are waiting to see how things will pan out. So, Julius, very quickly, you know, how do you adapt and ensure that you can go through this period so that then you can reconnect with your long-term view that Abdi talked about?
I think let's take it that Africa is in a very good position to weather the storm more than any other continent. It may not be obvious to you, but let me give you a few statistics that will show the resilience of Africa at this particular point in time. One, of course, is our geography. We are a vast continent. Our land area is 30 million square kilometers. The US, for example, is 9.9. China is 9.9. In terms of average age of population, the average age in Africa is 19. I mean, if you look at, say, Japan is at 52, the highest in the world. So Japan is past its sell by date. Similarly to Germany, to Russia. So if you look at the countries that led for Second World War, they have expired. So, and then together with that, look at the unprecedented technological developments, especially around bandwidth. That you have a young population, average of 19, with a mobile phone, with 5G, 6G, I don't know which G is coming. Okay? Look at the opportunities that unleashes. A level of creativity that if any country takes pole position with it, you emerge victorious irrespective of the chaos in the world. Then, because of this large land area, Africa has 60% of the remaining arable land in the world. 60%. So therefore, any country that takes advantage of tech in Africa will lead the world. And Kenya needs to reposition itself. And I guess that's what, that's the competitive advantage Traffic was looking at. The second one is on food production. Now, because of the challenges of using of chemicals and climate change and all this, since we have 60% of the remaining arable land, if we go organic, we grow organic food for the world, then we are in a very good competitive position. So there are opportunities that are emerging because of the challenges of the world. And so therefore, my view is Africa's moment has arrived. It is just the Africans to seize it, and provide leadership to the world. Now, it will not be given on a silver platter, because the powers of the world are also looking at us from an historical context. These slaves, these colonial remnants, what are they saying? So it's a question of how do we raise our head and say our position is now. And so it requires a lot more unity, a lot more focus, a lot more tactical leadership. So there are many software changes that must occur for us to emerge and say our position is now. If you look at Modi in India, that is what he's resetting the Indian software. Okay? Even this guy Duterte in Philippines, he reset the software of that country, and look at what has emerged. So we need Africa to reset the software of the African and tell this African guy, your time is now, stand up. Okay? Because if you are expecting a Japanese whose average age is 52 to lead the next curve, it's not possible. But we have that, historical mindset. So my view is we are in a very, very good position to take advantage of the changes in the world, and because those advantages favor us, and it is the most favorable point in history. It has never happened like this. So guys, your time is now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very powerful, isn't it? But I want to come back because we have executives here who are dealing with the problems of here and now. They're dealing with high inflation, they're dealing with high interest rates. I saw one company that I held dear is already about to sell a building that I played a big role in putting up. What advice, Abdi, what advice do you give these people? You're in this crisis now. How do you navigate?
I think one of the things I do in the middle of the night, like any self-respecting chief executive, is to read and go through data and look at a lot of stuff. And one of my recent readings about 2 or 3 days ago was on the import cover of different countries. So I just put up a list of the whole world. In Kenya today, we're at about trending between 3 and 4 months of import cover. And in that list, I saw 6, 7 months. Kenya is bang in the middle there. I saw 2 days. I saw 1 week of import cover. And I always try and do this comparison, because if you look at the picture that Julius was painting for the whole continent, there is also a need to look at the individual areas. So the southern part, low growth. In some of the countries, low population. Some of the countries have this hinterland, landlocked situation. East Africa is currently viewed very positively. And when you look at East Africa, Kenya plays a very, very important part. So I think the start point for me is, despite everything that is going on, the positioning is very important to understand. When we say crisis, what do we mean? What's the data telling us? What is the comparative data between Kenya and the next country and the next country? What is the exact position? Because the media sometimes has a lot of information, and a lot of it is useful, but it's also good to understand, start with a fact base. That's what I would say. Secondly, of course, it's what you invest in, and the most important is the talent and the people that are in the room that will make the difference for the organization. And you know that when the Vice Chancellor was speaking about, what was the word? Snafu. The era that we are in, this idea that a change will come and then after that we will go into a business as usual, I think is expecting a bit too much. I think that there is a need to have the talent and the people in the room that are going to handle that change. And I think it's becoming a key leadership competency, perhaps the number 1 leadership competency, dealing with ambiguity, change, crisis. I think the people side is quite important. There is a lot to say for technology and having the right solutions. People are talking a lot about AI now, not just in banking, but in medical and many other fields. It's transforming the world. How do we use that to stay ahead of the curve? Risk management, whether you are in banking or any other sector, becomes very critical. Risk is now not the thing you do after you've done your full strategy and then you come back and say, what are the risks in this process? It's part of the strategic formulation process so that you understand, how am I managing the individual risks within this process? So I'll go back to what I said earlier, which is a good balance between identifying your risks and having a system to proactively deal with it, but also identify opportunities. Identify opportunities. And in every one of these cycles, there are opportunities. One of the things I do is I meet a lot of our clients. I'm on the road a lot. And they inspire me a lot. You find people changing depending on what's changing in the regulation, what is changing in the global environment, changing their whole business model, relocating if they need to relocate, and doing what needs to be done to ensure that the business entity, survives. And I think that is what is expected of us. I think when either James or Dr. Caesar was speaking, there was something about the scarcity versus that mentality. And it reminded me of a talk I attended many years ago by a guy called Professor Nick Benadel, who was then leading Gibbs Business School in South Africa. And he talked about what he calls the map analogy of life, where you look at life as a series of opportunities and things that changes that you can benefit from, where you don't see life as scarcity or as win-lose. That's the map analogy. And I fell in love with that analogy. But the other one which he gave us was what he calls the war analogy of life, where every day is a war. You come to the office. For your company to survive, another company has to die. For your career to grow, somebody else's career has to take a beating, etc. That's the war analogy. It's like everything is binary. One person is winning, another one is losing. And when you talk about the map analogy of life, you're saying there are a series of opportunities. They are not mutually exclusive. They are unrelated. We can all work together to identify those opportunities. And I loved that analogy. So I think in this scenario, I think the war analogy may not survive, but anyone who has an opportunity mindset will definitely go to the next phase.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You know, that is very interesting. We are too small to pull each other down. And there's so much we haven't done that if we work together, there's so much more that we can do. I think there is a lot of opportunity. I want to come to the audience and to give you a chance to, because maybe I left an important question. And I want the first question to go to Brenda because the next question I was going to ask her was for, the next question I was going to ask was for her. And since I want to give you a chance, I want the first person who has, based on what Brenda said or anything else you want to hear, someone who would like Brenda to answer a question. And I'll come to the other gentleman. So if you can put up your hand if you have a question for Brenda.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening all. I'm Wycliffe Ouma from the ILO, the National Labour Organization. And indeed the global picture is not good, especially in employment and labor. But going to Dr. Kipng'etich, we've stuck our minds on the global aspects, looking at Ukraine and what's happening in Israel, between Israel and the Palestine, the Hamas. What about the pockets of instability that are closer home? We are looking at Sudan, we are looking at the continued instability in DRC, which is now part of the East African community, and the fragility that persists in Somalia. What does that, speak to our economy here as a country?
I think the key word probably we can use to explain that is the power of contagion. Okay? So the war in Somalia was not contagious. So it affected Kenya slightly, and it affected Ethiopia, and probably just shipping routes. But that through piracy and the rest. But it never went beyond there. Okay? The same thing in Sudan. It is mainly based in Sudan, and it never created a contagious effect around the world. So, you see, the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, had a contagious effect because of the food production which was going on in Ukraine, and it affected grain prices. So, I think if a crisis can be contained within a particular region, okay, we should be able, as business leaders, to be able to say, how does this affect global supply chains? And if it can be contained, by the world quickly, then we might say this is a localized problem, and so therefore we are indemnified against that contagion. So I think that's a way I would explain some of the way, or a way of analyzing global crisis, which is the power of to be able to spread beyond that localized region.
Thank you, Julius. Dr. Ogutu had a question.
Sure. I think when we read newspapers, they'll be dealing mostly with economics or politics, and that's what we're actually dealing with mostly here. But then coming from a psychology background, I also tend to look at life from a social, psychological, philosophical perspective. And when we're looking at the shifting sands, there are shifting sands in terms of behavior, philosophies, worldviews, and some of them could really shake the world. So I was just wondering, from your experience, are you seeing behavioral changes in the workplace that are so different from anything you ever experienced in the past, and you're wondering, how is this going to affect companies going forward? Do we know how to react to it? What are we going to do? So I'd like to hear a little bit about that side of the shifting sands as well.
Brenda, would you like to take that one?
Thank you, Dr. Gutu. Definitely, the workplace has changed. I believe COVID and how we changed our working model from actually working from home brought a whole new dimension to how people treat the workplace. In the beginning, it was very difficult to get people to leave the office and tell them, you are going to have to go home, literally to say, you must leave. Even said, telling them, carry your chair, because it was just, you must go, we are closing. And then now, we got used to it. And the issue was bringing people back into the workplace. And how companies had to go above and beyond to attract their workforce to say, you need to come back, because also our rules of engagement had changed. And now, even as we speak, we still can conduct meetings through virtual platforms. We have hybrid models, and we truly have re-looked at what is the workplace. So we've all had to adapt. And I believe that also showed us that we can adapt, we can be agile, and we can use a lot of tools that were there, but for whatever reason we didn't use them. Now that brings a whole new dimension to employers, but also I believe employees have more rights. They know they have rights, and they need to be listened to. Another thing that has changed is also diversity and inclusion. And truly that is something that we look at in the workplace today. It is something that was not there before. And that is actually a good thing. It also, we need to now, all of us, be more conscious about what I would call unconscious bias. Because we all have unconscious bias. And I think in the workplace, whereas that was something that was tolerated, now more and more we want people to be more sensitive to it and to understand it. And this is because also we are now more global. All of us. And so I think there's definitely a different dimension in the workplace today than there was many years ago, or when some of us entered the workplace. But this is a good thing. And you also alluded to it. We have to keep learning. We have to see ourselves as creatures of continuous improvement. And if we go with that mindset, because I think it is a mindset, and also as Kenyans go with also a more global mindset, I think it will serve us better, not just for ourselves, but also for the place that we will hold in the world today. As has been alluded to, let us take that place. But to do so, let's truly also make sure we know that global mindset.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Okay, so we'll have one question down there and from Roy, and then I'll ask our panel for their concluding remarks.
Good evening. My name is Catherine Bukachi from SCAN Group. I just want to build on that conversation from Dr. Gutu around the behavioral changes we're seeing at the workplace. And this is really relating to the menace today that we see that is consistently influencing or affecting the workforce from a mental health perspective. So if you can just kindly help us understand with these shifting sands today that we're seeing, the mental health has become a real issue. We are asking our teams to come and be authentic. At the same time, we have the agile mindsets we want to see with the different economic nuances and the several conversations happening. How do we strike a sweet spot where we actually don't break our workforce? Thank you.
It's a very, very important topic. It has always been, but I think in the last few years as we've gone through this, I really like this shifting sands idea. You know, this week Ambassador Mudhaura launched his book, and it's called something like the moving horizons. You know, we think our world, the corporate world, shifts until you track the career of a political leader over the last 10 years and you see how many changes they've had to go through to survive in that setup. And because of all the changes that are happening, you find that people are dealing with stresses that are related to the career and the professional side of it, but also issues in the personal and family life. And you know, in our company, what we are trying to do is ensure that there is an opportunity for people to express themselves. There is availability of help in case required. One of the things we've discovered in the last 1 or 2 years is there is also a gender element to it. And at present in APSA we have an intervention that is very specific for men, that is led by men, that is looking at some of the issues that they deal with. There has been a lot of reluctance for men to address mental health issues. And so while we are doing that for the general population, there is also some specific interventions that we are doing that are quite important. There is also a generational component to it. The younger people are more open on these issues of mental health and would like it addressed. And if the leaders in the company address mental health issues more, you're likely to attract younger people more into the company. You know, my daughter is a clinical psychologist, and when she started work the first time, I was asking her, how is work, what's going on, how is everything? And she told me how, she said, this is a fantastic place. It's a place where I'm allowed to be creative. I'm allowed to be myself. There are many opportunities for me to do this. And like typical Kenyan parent, I was asking, what about the work itself? Because so far you're talking about the surrounding, you have not yet told me how the work is. But the reality for that generation is that those things are very, very important. While those of us who started work when I did, you are very much more focused on what you do on a daily basis, and many times you contained your mental health to yourself. And I think that is changing within the organizations. And organizations that are more open about mental health, where even leaders, people like myself who are the CEO, are more open about it, are vulnerable, talk about their own struggles, those organizations then attract younger people and are able to support them. So I really like the topic you've picked. It's so critical for the next phase of organizations.
In the last 5 years, the world has stored more data than all the previous years since the world was created. Just in 5 years. So, all this information is being bombarded on the human being sitting on this planet at one go. And you are expected to process and make a decision. That is really the heart of this mental stress. And remember, those of you who have done accounting, it was assumed, you assume a company is a going concern. Now, things like climate change is making the earth look like it's no longer a going concern. And so, it is then creating a shock for younger people and many citizens of the world. It's like, if it's not a going concern, so what becomes of me? Now, combined with that, you look at the world has lost a global leader with a very clear moral compass. You see, like, you look at America, I mean, it's being tested for what it stood for before pre-Trump. Now, post-Trump, America is lost because Israel, for example, is testing their moral strength. I mean, their foreign minister, Blinken, went to Tel Aviv and he said something which shocked me because I saw it live. He said I'm the American Secretary of State, but more importantly, I am a Jew. So that bias is decision to a moral crisis that he was facing live on the ground. So the world then has information overload. The world then is facing a going concern issue as a result of climate change, and the world is lacking a global leader to show direction. So all that is bombarding the human race now and is creating a crisis, an internal crisis. And remember, the human mind was not designed to absorb that level of pressure. Okay, if you look at even from change theory again, it says that a human being changes their mind between 5 to 7 years, a cycle. But now here, you're telling a guy, keep changing every 6 months. Now the brain was not designed to absorb all that. And so, Catherine, the pressure to change is very, very high. So probably we need now to, universities then must up their game in research on how to, change the human brain faster than it was originally designed. That's that's where the next Nobel Prizes will come from. So let's see what happens. But that's really the crisis. And so if we can, for example, a country can emerge to give people hope and stabilize the world, that can then solve this going concern issue. And then we are able to collectively rally around the global crisis as a community of nations, okay? Using, say, if the UN still works, platforms like this, and say, let's give hope to the world. And then now, with artificial intelligence, we can process this data using machines and only just probably pick that which requires human intervention. Things like, so solutions are beginning to emerge, but how fast can we stabilize the world? And that's why I was saying, whenever there is any disturbance in a system, it always stabilizes. It will find its own level. And probably in another 5, 10, 15 years, we will find our own level after going through a lot of crises, and these mental problems will begin to ease. That's my view.
I think we have a last question, and if you allow me, I'll ask, I think it's Roy who wanted to ask a question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the riveting conversation and ideas. Businesses are influenced by the internal and external factors. Now, we have the proverbial elephant in the room. I will try to reframe it in a different way. Especially with Brenda playing a pivotal role in KEPSA. The question is, how much or how much more can businesses do to influence public policy or policy making for us to have that more conducive environment that businesses can operate in? Are we engaging the policymakers enough, or what more can we do as private sector? Thank you.
Thank you. Unlike Julius, who can predict the cycles, this is not something that one can predict, but I'd like to say that, are we doing enough? I think we need to ask ourselves as individuals what role we are playing ourselves in trying to influence advocacy and policy. Both parties, both sides will each have a view, but a lot takes place before policies are enacted. At KEPSA, we are the umbrella body for all business associations in the country. So the one thing I ask is, are people or businesses members of a particular business association? Are they actively involved? And do they use the mechanisms that are currently in place to put forward their views? One of the things that happens when we engage with the government and with statutory bodies, sometimes they come back to us and say, so when we had public participation, we put the advert in the newspaper. I agree, maybe the morning of the actual day that the participation is meant to take place, but for sure things are getting better. But nobody comes. Nobody puts up their hands. We ask, and I can say this now, we have the new Special Economic Zone amendments to the gazettement that have now been posted this week for public participation. And I truly hope people look at these and see what are the incentives that businesses want the government to consider. Because these are avenues for us to play. Treasury, when it comes to the national budget, they have public participation across the country, and they allow you to go into a website and actually put in anything that you wish to suggest. And you know what? Unfortunately, so many of us just don't put in any responses, or we don't even give input to our business associations, and in turn then it rolls up to KEPSA. So please have the mindset of being involved. And if you may be a little nervous about doing it, then reach out to somebody who isn't and say, do you mind if you put this in? I'll put my hand up. If you want something to be said, let us know. Because that's one of the roles we play as business associations, is to make sure that your voice is heard. And the more that you are tenacious, and you are resilient, and you have the facts, and you know that this is a good thing to happen, eventually it happens. But you have to ride the course. And you have to be consistent. It's not all rosy, but I do believe, and I know this personally, in the last year, we put a lot of thoughts to government to consider, and they enacted them in the Finance Act. And they're watching to see if what we asked, people are going to actually use them and make a difference. So also please play the part. We cannot keep asking for things and then we don't participate. And I'm not saying that you must, but if we ask, try and see where there's a difference, try and see where there's opportunity. Because I think if we have that positive mindset, and not the one where we're going to war every day, positive, let's see if we can encourage each other to take advantage. It may not be your company, but you may see another company. It may not always be about you. And as we sit in business associations, for myself as I sit in KEPSA, I don't sit in KEPSA to represent my business interests. I sit in KEPSA to represent everybody's business interests for the betterment of Kenya, for our country, and for all of us. So please feel free to use these channels and to use ourselves. And this is also part of that mindset on mental health. Sometimes we just don't say what we need to say. But the great thing about it is, here we are in 2023 in a business dinner conversation, and mental health was raised, and everybody had an opinion. That is progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brenda. We're coming to the end. I think it's time to hear the final thoughts from our panel, and I'll start with Abdi, come to Julius, and by that time Brenda will have settled down from such a wonderful exposition on the role of KEPSA. All right.
Yeah, I think for me, I would like to close with the role of leadership in everything that we do, whether it's business performance, whether it is how we all go through the current phases that we're going through, whether you're talking about transformation and innovation. We say that leadership plays a disproportionate role. Disproportionate. So the people in this room and people like us play such a big role in driving the agenda forward for our companies, but more importantly, the collective agenda, because there is that higher level when we all work together and drive together. There is that higher level, and I feel that if we fix leadership, public sector sector, private sector, all of us, if the leadership quality, the leadership engagement, the leadership values, the leadership ethics is all going in the right direction, then there is no challenge we cannot weather. So I think for me the message that I will leave with the team is the one of leadership and the role we all play every morning when we walk in and how many people we impact. I was reading a book the other day that talks of everybody deserves good leadership. It's a human right. People deserve to be led well. And when I read that book, it was a Maxwell book, I actually felt very challenged. I was asking myself, what leadership am I providing? Are my teams getting what they deserve from me? And I think that's the question that I would like to leave with every leader who is here.
Thank you, Abdi. Julius?
Okay, just picking up from what Abdi has said, there's one thing I've been advocating for close to 25 years now, which is the world is looking for an African country or African people who can take their place at the high table. I've always looked at Kenya as one of those countries, and let me give justification to why Kenya. I'll speak like that American ambassador, but she's preaching what I used to preach earlier. You see, in terms of the most educated black people on a proportionate basis, Kenya is number one in the world. So we have very educated black people. There's one thing Brenda talked about. These educated people are non-militant. So we are not like South Africans. Okay? Those are militant. Or Bompas. Those are Nigerians. We are very composed, humble people, and that is why we do very well in the hotel industry in the region. Every 5-star hotel you enter in East Africa is run by a Kenyan, literally. And so we have these very dedicated leaders. And then if you look at the geography of Kenya, we have all the climates of the world rolled in one country, and there are just probably 2 or 3 other countries with that similarity. From snow-capped mountain to savannas, tropical forests, the Rift Valley, the lakes, the beaches. I mean, it's incredible you find all that in one space. And so therefore, we should be number one in tourism in the world. I mean, France, which is number one, I think last year it went to 117 million tourists. Yet we did 1.2 or 3 million in Kenya. Why? Why should that be the case? So we have huge potential. Now the question is, how do we translate that potential into opportunity? And it goes back to what Abdi was saying. The leader in you must then come out. Are there people who have then made that blossom? Of course, yes. What Brenda is doing at Traffic, what Equity is doing in Congo. From 2015, a Kenyan bank moved from nothing to position 1 in DRC as the largest bank. So there's something Equity is doing. Look at what Strathmore is doing in East Africa in advancing business education. I mean, I come to teach Tanzanians. Our whole bank is coming and say, bring our... So we have huge potential. What we're just looking for are leaders to look at those global problems, isolate them, and say, some of them are not contagious, they don't affect us, and we are going to take an incredible risk and translate that potential in our continent and export it to the world. If we do that, and I know you guys are
that caliber. That's why you're in Strathmore and or associated with Strathmore. The seed for greatness of Kenya already exists. It is just, let us just do it. And if you read the story of NRT, I think Caesar talked about, I'm the chairman of NRT. Just look at our website, nrtkenya.org, and just look at how people who are the wretched of the earth, last year were the first communities in the world to qualify for carbon credits, and they got $16 million. This year, they are going to get, before the end of this year, they are getting $26 million. And for the next, net zero, so it will be around 2050. So that's when the carbon credits will end. Can you imagine them earning, on average, $30 million for the next 27 years? So from the wretched of the earth to key beneficiaries. So you need to think through and say, these challenges that Kenya is facing are the greatest opportunities, and you, as the leader, how do I translate this? And don't for a moment look at the color of your skin. Look at what the gray matter in your brain and go for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julius. Brenda, final words.
Thank you. I was worried you were going to say the grey hair, so. So as you said, Julius, it's about the huge potential. I also want to give a statistic. In the latest World Bank report, they say that Kenya is poised for growth in services, and we've all alluded to that. In the last 5 years, from 2018 to 2023, 55% of our foreign direct investment into this country is in services. In services, which means people. So I would like us all collectively to create that environment where we are, in our businesses, in our schools, where businesses thrive, where employees thrive, where we make sure they're better equipped to adapt and to be agile. And that comes with that mindset of being a great leader, which is a gift, but also comes with so much responsibility. So you really have to prepare yourself mentally and everything so that we can continue to innovate because we are innovative, so that we can thrive in the face of Sunafu. Thank you.
Let's give So ladies and gentlemen, we started with shifting sands. We started with all these crises we have. I think what this panel of two gentlemen and a lady have done is to tell us it is time we stopped the negative talk, and thank you, Abdi, for this. And we saw the opportunity, we changed and shifted our mind from seeing the problem, because someone said our media and all that is full of all these negative stories, and begin to see the huge potential that we haven't exploited, that we ought not to think about so much about the crisis. Yes, we must still try and work hard to overcome I would call them occasional challenges, and then focus on that long term so that we can achieve that vision that Julius has for Kenya. But I also wanted to add here, because we have Tanzanians, we have Ugandans in this room, for East Africa and for Africa. For personally, every time Africa goes up, it doesn't matter for me whether it is in East Africa, South Africa, West Africa, even North Africa. I feel that we are taking our rightful position in the global scheme of things. So thank you, good panel, and can we give them a final clap? And give yourself a clap as well, because you are a very attentive audience. Thank you very much, and have a nice evening, and thank you, Jim.